Welcome back to Foundation Explanation. Terms like hotspot, ambient temperature, relative humidity, those are all terms you can find in care sheets. And care sheets are information packages that can be used by more experienced keepers. But if you are in the beginning of your reptile keeping career, you still need to learn about how to achieve those settings. And also, and this might even apply for the more experienced reptile keeper, what do these terms actually mean? In this video series, I'm going to talk about all of this. My name is Robert Bronkhorst. Let's dive into today's topic. This week's episode is Temperature Part 3, Heat Sources. In this episode we are going to talk about the different kinds of heat source you can use in your reptile enclosure. And after that I'll explain how to pick the right one for your situation. In order to keep this video short, I will talk about thermostats in the next episode. But it is absolutely critical that you know that you always need to use a thermostat coupled to your heat source. Your reptile can survive cooler temperatures without any long-term effects, for a certain amount of time, of course, and also to a certain extent, obviously. But if your reptile overheats, for most species, meaning a core temperature of 40 degrees Celsius or above, can be fatal pretty fast. And if they survive, they often have neurological problems after that. So again, it is absolutely critical that you use a thermostat coupled to your heat source. Using a certain wattage of lamp size to a certain size of tank is old school and tricky. The reptile hobby is far beyond that point, and thermostats don't need to be as pricey as big reptile brands sell them for. They are most of the time certainly are not worth it, but that's for next week's episode. For now, I did want to stress that it is absolutely critical that you use a thermostat coupled to your heat source. We can split them up into two categories. The first category is belly heat, meaning heat is coming from underneath the snake. You can use heat cables, a heat rock, or a heat mat for this. The second category is heat from above, usually light or radiation, infrared radiation of course. For heat from above you can use a heat lamp, a ceramic lamp, or less popular, and I've heard they don't work as well, but I don't have any experience with them, a heat panel. Which heat source you use, of course, depends on your type of enclosure. Let's talk about racking systems first. Now, first, I will always recommend that you use a vivarium or terrarium, depending on where you're from, how you call it, for your very first reptile, because it gives you the ability to observe better, right? But that's maybe also for a later episode when we come to type of enclosures. But if you start the hobby with the intention of breeding ball pythons, it would make sense that you bought or built a racking system right away. Heating a racking system is simple. You only have a hotspot that would take up around 25% to 1/3 of the surface of your tub. For that, you would use a heat mat, ideally, especially for the bigger tubs. If you have smaller tubs, example for baby colubrids or baby leopard geckos, you can use a heat cable that is inserted below the surface of your rack so it doesn't get damaged by the in and out sliding of the tubs. When it comes to ambient temperature, there's only really one option, and that is to heat the entire room. Now you can see it does make sense to have racking systems for big breeders who have lots of animals, therefore lots of racks. So it does make sense to heat an entire room. I am in my snake room right now. It's pretty hot in here. It's 27 degrees Celsius. But it does make sense because I have lots of racks here. It doesn't make sense, of course, to heat an entire room just for one racking system. Now let's talk about vivariums or terrariums, depending on where you're from. Let's assume they are not inside a heated reptile room like this one is. Then you would need two heat sources to provide a hotspot and your ambient temperature, probably. For ambient temperature, a ceramic heater would be ideal. Make sure that you buy a brand that uses infrared C radiation only, like Arcadia. Now, ceramic heaters do not produce visible light, so they can be used both day and night, which is absolutely great. For the hotspot, you can also use a ceramic heater if you have the possibility to create a basking spot that is quite close to your ceramic heater, because they are good at emitting a overall temperature, but it's not so much localized unless you get quite close to it. I have that in my Amazon Tribo enclosures, but I get away with that because these enclosures are in my heated reptile room, so very close to the ceramic heater. There you have the hotspot temperatures, and that's also where I measure, where the probe of my thermostat is, very close to the heat source. And lower down into the enclosure around here, you have the ambient temperature of the room around 27 degrees Celsius, which is also good enough for Amazon tree boas. If your enclosure is not inside a heated reptile room, you also might get away with it, but you have to measure if the temperature on the bottom isn't way too cold for your reptile. For enclosures that are more wide than are high, you need to create a separate basking spot. You will not get away with using your single ceramic heater as both your hotspot and your ambient temperature. For that, you probably would not get away with using two ceramic heaters, both coupled to their own thermostat, for your hotspot and the other one for your ambient temperature. The overall temperature will be way too high because of the amount of warmth or energy they release each. So you will need to choose a different lower output heat source for your hotspot or your basking spot. For that, I usually recommend a heat rock. The nice thing about heat rocks is that you can put them on top of the substrate, especially if you have the traditional glass vivariums that are commercially sold. If you use a heat mat or a heat cable right on top of the glass, you risk a very high chance of cracking the glass. But if you have a heat rock, you can place it on top of the substrate, and the substrate will insulate the glass bottom from your heat source, so your bottom won't crack, which is always nice. Nobody wants a cracked bottom, right? Or is it just me? If you have a vivarium made out of wood or PVC, you do get away with using a heat mat or a heat cable as your heat source. I would recommend a heat mat because it is flat and it is more evenly distributed. You do need to use a concrete tile or a ceramic tile on top of your heat mat though, to sort of stabilize the temperature in there, and also to function as a storage for all the thermal energy, so your reptile doesn't need to bask as long. I will explain that briefly. A heat mat is made out of plastic and a little bit of copper, which is the resistance wire that heats up when you put current through it. When the hotspot temperature is reached, the thermostat switches off. After the thermostat switches off, power supply is cut to your heat mat, and it will cool down in seconds because it doesn't have a lot of mass and it doesn't have a lot of thermal mass, so it will cool down in seconds. Therefore, no longer be a hotspot where your reptile is basking on. Now you have to wait for your little tiny metal probe to cool down and register the drop in temperature before it actually switches on again. That fluctuation is not ideal for your reptile. It can only result in that it would have trouble heating up. If you put something out of stone, and it has to be flat because your heat mat is flat. If you put it on top of your heat mat, that can function as a heat sink or a storage for your thermal energy. Your reptile can use that to absorb energy more fast or heat up more fast. That's basically what it means. Absorbing energy more fast means it heats up more fast. Now I just thought of it. This is not in the script, but I just thought of it. You may think, well, I am clever enough to just put a heat mat on top of the substrate. Then did that you told me put a towel on top of that. Well, especially if you have a snake or lizards as well, they can also be very smart and try to bury under your hotspot. if the substrate that is left can bear the weight of your ceramic tile or concrete tile, you can crush your animal. So don't be smart. If you use a heat mat, put them directly on the bottom of your enclosure. Only do that if your enclosure is made out of wood or PVC. Put a towel on top of that, and then in between that, the probe of your thermostat. A basking lamp? Is it basking lamp or basking? I think if you're from England, it's basking. If you're from America, it's basking. If you're from the Netherlands and speak English, I think you can just pick one. A basking lamp is great to use as a hotspot as well, but you have to make sure that you put a big rock under the heat lamp or the basking spot. That big rock can heat up during the day, so your reptile can bask after sunset, your artificial sunset, as well as they would do in nature as well, right? If you have species that are not active during the day but active during dusk and dawn, I think are the terms I was looking for, they will use rocks to bask, really. Heating lamps or basking spots, whatever you want to call them, can only be used with dimming thermostats as well. They would not work with thermostat that switch on and off for two reasons. First of all, it will be very annoying for you as well, right? This is not fun to sit in all day. The second thing is, it is not good for the lifespan of your now probably quite expensive incandescent bulb. Only use them with dimming thermostat. Now the bad news is that dimming thermostats, standalone dimming thermostats, because they are probably in your house as well for your central heating system, but standalone dimming thermostats don't really have a lot of use outside of the reptile hobby. So you probably need to buy a Reptile branded one, and so they are not cheap. But the upside of using a basking lamp or a basking spot, a little bit depending on the species that you keep, can really promote natural behaviors or more natural behaviors, and also you don't have to rely on belly heat. Now, belly heat doesn't have to be a problem. We use a lot of belly heat in our industry, especially in racking systems. Belly heat becomes problematic when the ambient temperature is too cold, because your animal is lying on a warm hotspot, so the belly is warm or the body is warm, and then it breathes in cold air that can really cause some inflammation or mucus buildup in the lungs. It can really cause some respiratory infections. So if your ambient temperature is right, it is absolutely fine to use a heat rock or a heat mat as your hotspot. But heat from above is always a little bit better, because it is a little bit like the more natural way of doing things artificially. In the next episode, I'll explain about the different types of thermostats and when to use which kind. After that, I will briefly explain how they work and how they break most of the time. That will really help you troubleshoot into the future, and also makes you understand why a relay powered thermostat that costs €150 is just plain ridiculous. After that episode, I think it is wise to put the whole temperature story together to show you what it would look like inside a vivarium or a racking system, and that can also mark an end to temperature as the subject for foundation explanation, so we can move on to relative humidity. I really hope that you've learned something. If not, I at least hope that you enjoyed watching this video. If not, well, props to you for sticking to the end anyway. That really shows dedication, and you can put that skill on your resume as a skill to be proud of. Please like the video and subscribe to my channel if you are not one of the 23 current subscribers. I really like to thank you for your time. I wish you a lovely day and hopefully see you in the next one.